Hello, everyone. This is Anthony Smith. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am the economist here at FreightWaves, and today we're going to be talking about macroeconomics and some of the indices that we have in SONAR. I am so excited to have you guys here with us today, and hopefully we'll come away with learning a few things here and how to incorporate some of the macroeconomic indicators and make them useful for you. And maybe you can come up with your own combinations or insights altogether. So, quick intro on me. As I mentioned, I'm Anthony Smith. I'm an economist here. I have been at FreightWaves for quite a few months now. And my background is in economic consulting. I've done a bit of consulting with the executive level on economic outlook, forecasting, market analysis, some tech evaluation, housing construction, and I've done a few projects within the trucking space altogether. So that's my background, my spiel. I'm always free and available to contact here at FreightWaves. But without further ado, let's just jump into things here. Um, First off, when we're talking about macroeconomics, I think the biggest thing that most people really take away from macroeconomics uh, is GDP, better known as gross domestic product. We have a few measures of GDP here, and the Sonar Knowledge Center here, the FreightWaves Knowledge Center for Sonar. One of the We can just click around here. We have real and we have nominal. This is We'll just get into what it is as an overall indicator. As many of you know, this is essentially going to show. I'm sorry, is this the one? Yes, this is the essentially going to show a measure that reflects the value of goods and services that's produced in an economy for any given year. This is definitely one of the most commonly used macroeconomic indicators. But the big thing here is that it measures goods and services. So services being the big takeaway, things that don't move freight. So as I mentioned, we have a few measures here. We have the real and we have nominal real, which is adjusted for inflation. We can go back here. We also have nominal, which is not been adjusted for inflation and the value of all final goods and services produced by an economy. So, as I mentioned, this is really the broad-based measure for the U.S. economy. And as many of you may know, that the U.S. economy is mostly dominated by consumer spending. Consumer spending making up around 70% of overall economic activity when we're looking at the consumption side of the economy. And the real big takeaway here within that GDP number, 70% being consumer spending. Of that 70%, 65 of percent of that is going to come from services. So services, again, things that don't move freight. So what are we interested in? We are more interested in goods adjusted GDP. So this is going to give us a GDP calculation that is going to really be focusing on the goods side of the economy. We have goods adjusted GDP here. We can just click in here. We can see what is it. It is the goods adjusted gross domestic product. And so what this is going to look at is all the figures that are relevant to the freight economy. So when we're looking at the movement of stuff, here it is. We can go into Sonar now. I was poking around in here a little bit earlier. We're looking at nominal. So again, just that dollar amount for GDP, that's not telling us a lot of insight. We're just seeing essentially a line moving upwards and upwards and upwards. That's not telling us anything. So um, what we can do is we can look at it at on first off a year over year basis, and secondly, that goods adjusted. So we can type in our ticker here, GAGDP, I believe. Y for year over year growth .USA. So we can do it that way. Of course, we can just type in um, the word verbatim if we don't remember the ticker. A lot of the times it's hard to keep track of all the tickers. So one of the things I love about Sonar, you can just type in what you're looking for. So when we have goods adjusted GDP, now we see a little bit more fluctuation here. As many as you know, 2016, not a great year for freight, and a lot of ramp up in activity in 2018. We can even overlay this with our OTRI, our outbound tender reject index, OTRI.USA, and put that in there and see what kind of relationship we have once we get this on a dual. Let's set OTRI as our main, put out about a year. And let's, just to make it a little bit easier to see, let's put on large fonts here. Um, so we can see once we back it out a little bit. Um, 1 second here. We can see once we have this downward movement after this ramp up here in 2018, the goods adjusted GDP also goes down as we have a decline in our outbound tender rejection. So this is really telling us, when remember, when we're looking at outbound tender rejections, we're looking at capacity. Is capacity tight? Is it loose? When capacity is really loose, there is not a lot of rejections going on. But when capacity is tight, there's a lot of is really busy, a lot of freight moving around the country. Rejection is a little bit high. We can see a little bit jumps in some spot rates. We can see jumps in activity as now there are more options for drivers and carriers. So that's really one thing to really be pertinent of. Um, that really drives home the point of how to interpret GDP. Again, this is broad-based measure, but when we're hearing about GDP numbers, we can have the separation when we see that there is on the ONS GDP grew at the fastest clip in 5 years, and you might not be seeing that in the freight industry. All that's going to come down to, well, because the freight industry is driven, or the GDP in the economy is driven by the consumer and a lot of services side. So within that, we also have other consumer facing indices that are pertinent to freight. So just before we jump into, I think the first thing that comes into mind, retail sales and e-commerce and things like that, we have, let's take a step back into construction. So consumers are going to be the primary driving force behind construction. Housing starts. Um, Newest housing starts numbers just showed a nice jump up this yesterday morning, I believe. But when we're looking at construction, let's just go with COSP.res. We have construction spending for the residential side. Um, and so this is going to measure as it just pretty much what it says, total construction spending for residential units. So we're looking at not just homes going up, but home improvements, not just single family, but multifamily. So all of the in between. Biggest thing with construction, it's going to have downstream effects. So when we're looking at construction, um, one of the key drivers here with construction is going to be flatbed. So we have a flatbed. Let's see if I can pull this up here. FO try.USA. When we look at construction materials being moved throughout the country, that's going to really dive into the flatbed side of things. And so we can see, we can even throw a study on there, a moving average to smooth out this line. Let's do a 30-day moving average here, just to smooth things out a bit. But we can see when construction spending is higher for residential, we can see a little bit more flatbed activity. And when construction spending starts to die down, we can see that there is less and less flatbed outbound tender rejections, fewer and fewer opportunities, looser capacity out on the markets. So that's really a big indicator here for us. Now, that's just the top-down approach. So far, we've looked at GDP, we've looked at construction spending. Now, you might be asking, okay, flatbed, construction spending, got it. That's about all there is to it. But I assure you, there is more. When we're looking at construction spending, there are downstream effects. So when we're looking at it, not it doesn't just end at these building materials being hauled into the job sites. There are downstream effects because when I moved into a new home, it was a little bit difficult for me to bring all of my furniture. So a lot of times you have to have new furniture brought into that place. Consumers also filling those homes up with new appliances. So there are downstream effects. So once the home goes up, doesn't mean that's the end of freight. Now, there can be communities built out around it. So not just homes, but now offices. Um, Now we're looking at restaurants, entertainment, parks, all that good stuff. All has to be brought in via truck. A lot of times it's going to be flatbed, and the downstream effects really has implications for dry van as well. One of the things, like when we're looking at retail sales, I think we have RESLSOFA, retail sales of sofas. We can see that there are. Uh, let's see, where would be a good one here? Let's do van. It's not going to be a one-to-one, but when there is heightened activity for construction, retail sales are going to more than likely have to compensate for that when we're having increased furniture production, furniture being brought. So that's all has freight implications overall. And a lot of times, one of the cool indicators here, because there might be demand for homes, and the homes aren't being built. So one of the good barometers for not just homes, but more so consumer confidence and outlook is the HPSI.USA, the Home Purchase Sentiment Index. Um, so this index really measures how consumers feel about buying a home, purchasing a home, and the outlook over the next 6 months, and really is a good barometer um, for consumer confidence, consumer outlook, and the overall economy. As I mentioned earlier, the consumer drives the economy, so this is a really good measure here. So this is one of the cool measures that we look at, just because if housing starts aren't quite where we expected them to be, maybe it's a supply issue, not so much a demand issue, we can see that there's demand here. One of the things that we want to keep in mind for demand is because it's going to show up in other areas of retail sales, even if it's not showing up in housing, because now we still want to see rise in retail sales in other areas, such as everyone's favorite e-commerce. So I believe we have non-store retail sales in here. RESL.NSTR. And of course, we can see a nice upward movement for both. When the consumer is in a good place, they are out there, they are confident, they're buying, they're spending. So that's really the really big takeaway here when we're looking at the consumer side of it all. And that spending is really going to translate to freight activity. So what we've done here is we've taken a look at a big side of the consumer side of things with GDP, the adjusted GDP, housing, construction, home purchasing sentiment. Great. There's another aspect to this whole freight market thing, and that really comes in on the industrial side of the economy. One of my favorite measures here, industrial production. We can get back into the knowledge center here. I believe we have industrial production here. The iPro indices here. We have industrial production, and one of my favorite things about industrial production is that it's a measure of um, the total manufacturing and energy output when we're looking at mining and things like that. But it is broken down into a few different granularities. And so we have total production, aerospace, chemicals, coal, petroleum, computers, electronics. So you can see here we have quite a few um, that it can be broken down into. And so when we're looking at industrial production, that is where it's also going to drive flatbed activity when we're looking at machinery being moved throughout the country. We're looking at durable goods typically defined as goods that have a shelf life of 3 years or more. A lot of times that's going to drive in activity. And don't think I forgot about the refrigerated units. We also have non-durable goods. I know it's not exactly foods, but let's just, for example, let's look at industrial production for non-durable manufacturing, and let's do a comparison to our RO try USA. So our reefer outbound tender rejection. So we can see a pretty cool relationship here. Again, it's not all foods and beverages, but I think it's about 1/3 when we're looking at the non-durable manufacturing side of the equation. And so we can see when there's a nice tick up here, um, and industrial production for non-manufactured goods, we can see a rise in the reefer outbound tender rejection. So increased activity leading to more and more options for these drivers and carriers that really tends to drive up the rejections rate. And the cool thing about our sonar data is that it is updated on a high frequency. So the industrial production number, I believe, is released by the Federal Reserve. We also have a wide amount of data from the U.S. Census Bureau and other sources, things like that. But when we're looking at our O try, I try, all the tries, we're looking at things on the day of. So um, this gives us an outlook of what we can potentially expect in the next month. So this is somewhat of a leading indicator for these other indices that are on a month to month basis. So I think that's a really, really cool takeaway here. But when we're looking at, let's get back into manufacturing overall. Um, Industrial production is really dominated by manufacturing. I believe it's about 75% of industrial production. And when we're looking at within manufacturing or industrial production overall, it's going to be about 11 to 12% of the US economy. So it plays a pretty vital role for the country itself. But again, we can have a manufacturing recession without really feeling it and the consumer side within GDP and things like that. So we can be an imbalance of sorts. Um, One of the big things to keep in mind with industrial production is that it does have it gets revised often. So I with new numbers from industrial production, just knowing what about current economic climate right now, if you're listening to the future, you can tell us what happened with tariffs in the comments below. But as of now, we have a lot of tariff uncertainty. So we don't quite know where the industrial or the manufacturing side is going to kind of be in a month, 2 months, 3 months from now, just because there's a lot of uncertainties with trade tensions. So that's really going to be something that's impeding not just manufacturing, but also going to reduce opportunities for freight carriers that might deal within that industry. So that's really one big thing to keep in mind. But we have different ways of analyzing those segments. So as I mentioned, industrial production is really going to be from the top up. We can drill down a little bit more here with industrial production because we have durable goods, new orders. So, we have orders here. This goes for durable goods and non-durable goods. So let's pull this up here. So we can look at durable goods. Let's go with durable goods, excluding defense is a good one because defense really it can be sporadic on a month-to-month basis, so it can really kind of throw off overall trends. So you might be thinking to yourself, Anthony, why would I care about orders? Well, let me tell you, because orders has downstream effects for production, which has downstream effects for shipments. And that's really the big takeaway. It tells us what we can really expect in the coming months for production, what we can expect for in the coming months with shipments and production, things like that. So when we're looking at this indicator, that's really one of the big takeaways that we want to have here. So one of the things is that orders don't always translate to shipments. And so I love shipments because that is the tangible good. It's there. It's been transported. It's been shipped. And so that's really what's going to have a more of an effect on freight. So let's see how this compares here with our some of our OTRIs. Let's try otri.usa here. And let's get this on a dual with OTRI as the main measure. And let's get rid of this study. Let's go over the last few months. Oh, let's back it out a little bit more. So when we're looking at shipped goods and outbound tender rejections, we can see a nice relationship here. But when we have a decline in shipments, voila, we have a decline in outbound tender rejections. So really telling us that there is more capacity on the market. And so that's really driving home the point that um, we can expect to have looser capacity, lower rates, less activity, lower volume overall. So it all really ties together. Of course, we also have this same measure for non-durable goods. But one of my favorites is going to come from the PMI numbers. That's put out by the ISM, the Institute of Supply Management. I believe we have it here. So PMI, the ISM PMI. What is it? It is, I think many of you are familiar with this. It is a survey-based index that is sent out on a monthly basis to purchasing managers. And it really measures their outlook for the industry. So again, one of the things I love about this is just how much it's broken down into many different categories here. So when we're looking at the PMI, the Purchasing Manager Index, it's based around the number 50. So anything above 50 is going to give us an outlook that these purchasing managers are seeing activity expand. Anything below 50 telling us that, okay, we're seeing contraction in the market. And many of you may know, if you listened to this recently, that not long ago, this fell below that 50 threshold. So let's pull this up. Let's pull up the ISM PMI here in SONAR. So again, we have some downward movement here with the Purchasing Managers Index. So 49.1, and you might be looking at this and say, "Hey, this downward movement, it looks familiar. What else has had a similar trajectory?" And that would, of course, be our flatbed outbound tender rejections. But here is a cool takeaway. We can kind of zoom in a bit. We see some upward movement here in our flatbed outbound tender rejections. So that is telling us that potentially that we have some rise in the future if this were to sustain on a weekly to monthly basis. And so that can kind of give us a bit of an insight, a peek into what potential construction activity might look like, what potential machinery new orders might look like. And so that would really give us a nice little insight into what's to come, what's further down the line. So again, one of my favorite indicators when we're combining it with our tender rejections indices, but it doesn't end there, ladies and gentlemen. The ISM also has, I believe, non-manufactured goods, and sorry about this. We also have the same thing for, you guessed it, reefer. So we can put out our refrigerated units here. Let's go with green, ROTRI.USA, and we can get a pretty cool relationship here. Now, again, non-manufactured doesn't always mean that it's going to need to be refrigerated, but and also non-manufacturing is also going to cover a good amount of services, but it also includes some food services and beverage services. So it's all going to kind of tie together with when we're looking at the movement of refrigerated units. And really, when we're looking at durable goods, that's going to have tie-ins to our van outbound tender rejections. When we're looking at manufactured goods, that's going to have tie-ins to our flatbed. When we're looking at machinery, when we're looking at these non-durable goods, it's going to have tie-ins to our reefer. So all of that really ties in together, and um, I think that that is really a good overview overall for the consumer side of things. When we reviewed how to look at GDP, don't get too caught up in the headline numbers, because remember, services, they don't move freight, but they sure do move the U.S. economy. But so look, focus on the good side. So look at that our goods adjusted indicator index and SONAR. Um, when you're looking at manufactured goods, check in with our flatbed activity. See what volume is looking like with our OTVI indicators, our volume indicators. Look at our tender rejections, because that's telling us what's going on in the market. Well, before we get these month-to-month indicators, we have a little sneak peek here. And the monthly indicators are great because it can help us diagnose what we've seen in the past. And with that, I believe I have potentially left a few minutes here for potentially a question. I don't know if any have come in. No questions yet. Okay, but we'll just hold off a couple minutes. Also, I can be reached at asmith@freightwaves.com. If you have any questions in the future, feel free to reach out. We love to hear from you. I love to help you guys out. And also, I know we have an amazing group of Sonar executives that can help out with demos and things like that. But really, I think driving home the point, the really amazing thing about our tools are that it gives us that insight when we're looking at the flatbed outbound tender rejections. It gives us that insight about what's on the horizon. So this is going to be something that's a big takeaway, regardless of government revisions, because our indices are always being fine-tuned and refined, and going through that continuous process. So this is one of the key measures that you can look for what's going on, keeping your finger on the market on both sides of the economy. And with that, I leave you all. Thank you again for joining us. It's my pleasure, and please join again next time where we cover a little bit more about Sonar. Thank you.